And we're back to chat about college football week 1. So how's everyone doing? Did you enjoy the week? How did you like the games? I had so much fun on Saturday. College football is officially back. Game day was awesome. I thought there was some really fun games and a lot of interesting storylines. So I'm recording this on Monday. So Florida State plays tonight. I do think they'll win, even though they looked terrible against Georgia Tech last weekend. I think they beat Boston College, but we'll talk about Florida State later. So today I'm going over 5 key takeaways from this weekend. 5, not really bold takes, but takes as a whole. Let's get into it. 5 takeaways. And come on, folks. Can you just spare a simple request? Just be cool. Hit the like button. Costs nothing. And if you like the video, subscribe. I'm going to be coming out with some more NFL content this week. College football every week. It's football season. Let's get into it. Takeaway number 1. Colorado has the best QB wide receiver combo in the nation right now. Now don't get me wrong, there's some strong contenders. Dart and Harris or one of the other Ole Miss guys. You of course have Dillon Gabriel in those receiving core. Shedeur Sanders showed on Thursday why so many people were hyping him up to be a number 1 overall pick. And he showed it last year too, but there was a lot more bad play that came out of last year. But on Thursday, even though it was just against an FCS team, it was one of the best FCS teams in the country, and they could definitely compete with a lot of FBS teams. Shedeur Sanders and Colorado offense looked phenomenal. Looking at some of Sanders' stats, advanced stats from PFF, he had a 90.7 overall grade, a 91.2% passing grade. So if you're in the 90s, you had a almost flawless game. He just looked incredible. He was 26 for 34. That's a 76.5 completion percentage. He had 445 yards, 13 yards per attempt, 4 touchdowns to 1 pick, which equals a 144.9 passing rating. Now, if we want to look at some of the advanced stats, like I mentioned at the bottom there, his ADOT, which is average distance on target, was 10.4. That means he wasn't just doing checkdowns, letting his uber athletic receivers take it to the crib by himself. He was pushing the ball past the chains on average every throw, which to me is a good sign of a higher skilled quarterback, a better prospect quarterback too, because while QBs definitely need to learn how to check down when it's needed, play the middle of the field when it's needed, you also want a QB who's willing to push the ball down the field. And that's also shown with his big throw percentage, the BTT, 13.9%. That basically means almost 14% of his throws were big play throws down the field. But what does 13.9% mean? Well, looking at some guys last year, Jayden Daniels, the Heisman winner, his average throw for the year was 8.4%. Jalen Milroe, one of the best college players we have this year and last year, was 10%. And then Caleb Williams, the first overall pick, was 6.2%. Now, I'm not expecting Sanders to keep it above 14% this year because the Heisman had 8.4. Jalen Milroe, who is one of the biggest big play guys in the country, just had double digits barely. So I do think it will drop. But the 14% is a great sign. Shedeur also had 0 turnover-worthy plays. Yes, he threw an interception, but if you watch the game, you watch the highlights, that was one of the flukiest picks I've ever seen. It wasn't a good throw, but it should not have been intercepted. And other than that, 0 of his throws were turnover worthy. He also had no potential fumbles. So he took care of the ball while pushing the ball down the field, making big time throws. Then the last stat is adjusted completion percentage. He had an 84.4%. Adjusted completion percentage basically means the percentage of your passes that were thrown on target. So this is another stat that I think is extremely valuable when assessing how good a QB is, because is he actually throwing the ball on target most of the time? And 84.4% is very accurate. Last year, we're looking at some of the guys' full season stats too. Bo Nix, who was one of the more accurate QBs we've ever seen, he was also playing in a system that allowed him to be very accurate, had an 85.9. So basically just 1.5 percentage higher. Jayden Daniels, again the Heisman, 79.9. And Caleb Williams, the number 1 overall pick, 77.5%. So if he can keep it 80 to 85, he's going to have a phenomenal year where he's just going to be racking up stats, but also looking like a true NFL prospect, which is what a lot of us wanted to see this year, so that he can match the hype that he's brought in, him and the whole Colorado crew have brought in. Now, the other guy, Travis Hunter, I don't really think I need to go much into. Travis has been looked at a top 5 pick for the past 2 years now, or last year and then starting this year, both as a receiver and a defensive back. He had an 81.5 receiving grade. His grade as a corner wasn't as good, only a 65.5%, but you got to think about all what he's doing on the field. Travis played 57 snaps on offense, 40 of them were passing, so he's out there running routes. And then he followed it up with 36 defensive snaps. So he almost played 100 snaps yesterday, which is just an insane amount. So if he keeps up that, so it's hard for him to really be an elite lockdown defender and even being an efficient wide receiver at end of games when he's playing this many snaps. But you also got to give him a lot of credit for wanting to be out there that many times, for wanting to play both sides of the ball. And what we saw in some of his highlights, his touchdown grab was insane. Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter, to me, legit are arguably by far the best wide receiver quarterback combo in the country this year. Takeaway number 2 is Penn State is a real threat this year. In years past, they were always one of the best 10 to 15 teams in the country, but they could never beat the big dogs. They couldn't beat Ohio State. They couldn't beat Michigan. They struggled in bowl games against other big schools. They were a small team merchant. They couldn't beat anyone that was of value. But I think this year could be different. Last year, Penn State had the 4th best overall defense, 9th best run defense, 2nd best pass rush, and 13th best coverage defense. They were one of the best defensive teams in the country. And this year remains no different. They have a top 10 defensive line, a top 10 linebacking core, and great players in this secondary. Multiple guys that will be drafted in the 1st round and the 2nd round. They overall have a top 10 defense, and they have a top rushing attack led by Singletary. But that's not just him. They have a lot of guys on the offensive line and options that can really attack the ball. But that's how they've always been. And looking at this schedule, Bowling Green, Kent State, Illinois, UCLA, 4 teams they should walk all over. USC will be tough. USC just won a really good game last night versus LSU, but Penn State can definitely beat them. Then they play Wisconsin, who hasn't been nearly as good the past couple years. Then they got Ohio State, that is their kryptonite. But then they got Washington, Purdue, Minnesota, Maryland, another 4 stretch of games that shouldn't be a problem. I think they could really come out of this regular season with 1 loss against Ohio State. And again, if there's a year they could beat Ohio State, I do think it's this year. Now, Ohio State is still stacked with talent, but we know the coach has kind of been on the hot seat We know they had a lot of turnover with some players this offseason. Their weapons aren't nearly as good with the loss of Marvin Harrison. Their running backs are still great. But Penn State is different this year, and there's one reason why. Drew Aller is going to be much better this year. Now, I know they only played West Virginia, and West Virginia is not a powerhouse by any means, but they are a good football team. It was in Morgantown. There was a lot of hype and pressure in this game, but what I like to see from Drew Aller was his ability to push the ball down the field. He had an average depth of throw of 12 yards. So he wasn't just doing checkdowns to the running back. He wasn't just doing screens and small drag plays. He was pushing the ball down the field, making some really good throws, standing in the pocket, throwing under pressure, throwing to guys that were covered. And that's what you want to see, because against the teams of Ohio State, against the big dogs of the SEC that they might play in the playoffs, they're not going to be able to just dink and dime their way to victories like they can against the Bowling Greens. Now, I'm not saying that Drew will be the best quarterback in the Big Ten this year. I'm not going to say he's going to be the superstar. But like I talked about, Penn State's team is loaded. Everywhere else, they just need Drew to, one, not make mistakes, which he didn't on Saturday with 0 potential turnovers. And they need him to be able to take shots down the field when needed to keep that defense honest, to keep them just from loading the box, pressing the receivers to prevent screens and everything like that. So Drew Aller, I think he really will take a step forward this year. He showed some good promise in Morgantown. I hope they let him continue to take shots down the field against these worst teams to get him ready for the Ohio States, for the playoffs. So Penn State will be a true threat this year in the playoffs compared to last year's when they didn't really have that respect. My third takeaway of this weekend is Clemson is just constantly getting overranked in preseason because of their name. In 2021, Clemson was ranked 3rd in the nation in preseason. And honestly, it was understandable. They were just coming off a stretch of the Deshaun Watson era, the Trevor Lawrence era. There was no reason to doubt them. But they finished 14th at the end of the season, 10-3 record, and 3rd in just the ACC Atlantic Division. So, very bad year compared to what they were doing, but everyone has down years. In 2022, we thought, hey, Clemson will be good again. So they were ranked 4th in the preseason. They finished at 13th, at 11-3. So not a bad year, but not the Clemson domination that we're used to or expect from a team ranked 4th in the country. In 2023, it was a little better. They were ranked 9th preseason, not a top 3 or 4 team, but they finished 22nd at 8-4, and they finished 6th in the ACC. So the past 3 years, they've dropped about 10 spots or more each year in the rankings from preseason to end of the season. So now we're looking at a trend of, well, they really haven't been a dominant team any of those years. Now, I understand Clemson played Georgia, and I wasn't expecting them to win. Georgia's defense is stacked, their offense is stacked, their whole team is just, to me, they have the best roster in the country. But they scored 3 points. Like, they were 4 for 13 on 3rd down. They averaged 4.9 yards per pass attempt. That is incredibly low. And then they only averaged 2 yards per rush attempt for 49 total yards in the game. Again, Georgia's defense is incredible, but that Clemson offense looked so bad. And the thing is, Clemson has a really good front line, but their QB play, their receivers, it's just not what the standard of what they used to be. And a big part of it is Dabo Swinney refuses to use the transfer portal. There's only 4 teams that have not used the transfer portal at all since it became a thing. Clemson is one of them. The other 3, Navy, Air Force, Army. 3 teams that per school policies don't accept transfers. So they're really the only team that has refused to use the transfer portal to improve. And I get Dabo wants to build his team from the start, build good habits, but you're at such a disadvantage by not using the transfer portal. Even someone like Kirby Smart, who has verbally said he hates the transfer portal, guess what he does though? He uses it because he knows he has to. If Dabo does not adjust, Clemson will be left in the dust. This isn't really a hot take or a breakdown, but Clemson continues to be overranked because of their name. Takeaway number 4 from week 1, Jackson Dart is on his way to winning the Heisman Trophy. Now, I understand all they did was play Furman. They're not a good team. They should blow them out. But Dart was incredible. In just 27 pass attempts, Dart put up 418 yards and 5 touchdowns. And he added that on with a rushing touchdowns for 6 total touchdowns. And all that was done in the first half. If you're looking at Ole Miss's schedule, the next 5 games are Middle Tennessee, Wake Forest, Georgia Southern, Kentucky, South Carolina. All of those games should be a cakewalk for this Ole Miss offense. Their wide receiver and tight end room is stacked with elite level talent. I would say it's a top 3 room, maybe even number 1. Then Ole Miss, after the South Carolina game, has its toughest stretch with 3 ranked teams out of 4 games. They play at LSU, home versus Oklahoma, at Arkansas, and then home versus number 1 Georgia. Now, if they can come out of that stretch with just only 2 losses, I think Ole Miss will be 1, for sure to make the playoffs, but 2, if Dart can just continue his stretch of just putting up numbers and leading a top 5 offense, it will solidify him as the Heisman front runner. And to be honest, I think they have a chance of going undefeated. I wouldn't expect it, but they have a chance. They play at LSU, but LSU's secondary is not very good. I think Dart can throw all over them. Then they play home at Oklahoma. Oklahoma is good for sure, but Ole Miss is another step up, and it's home. Then they have Georgia. Now, I don't think they beat Georgia, but it is at home. Ole Miss will be cooking. I think it's possible, but I really do think they come out of the season with just 1 loss, making the playoffs, and Dart puts up massive numbers. And if you look at his advanced stats from the game, his average depth of target was 12.2, meaning he was pushing the ball down the field. His adjusted completion percentage was 92%, meaning 92% of his throws were on target and accurate. He had 0 turnover-worthy plays. Again, this is just Furman. They don't have the secondary to match up with this offense, but I think very few teams do. I think Ole Miss finishes at worst 3rd in the SEC, secures a playoff spot. Dart continues to dominate, and he is the Heisman front runner. My last and final take of week 1 in college football is Miami has a clear shot and is easily the favorite to win the ACC. Coming into the season, people weren't really hype on Clemson, but they knew they had talent. Florida State was coming off an undefeated season, even though they had some turnaround, but both teams laid an egg in week 1. Clemson lost to a much better team, but they got blown out, and Florida State got upset by Georgia Tech. Now, looking at Florida State and Clemson's schedule, they will still have good years for sure, but Florida State will have to play at SMU. I think they're going to be underrated this year. They play Clemson, so they're going to steal one from each other. At Duke, they lost a lot of people, but they were competitive last year. They play at Miami. North Carolina won't be easy. Then they go at Notre Dame. Clemson plays App State next weekend, who's a team that historically upsets big teams a lot. They play NC State, which won't be tough, but at least they have them at home. Then they go at Florida State. Again, they'll steal one from each other. They play at Virginia Tech, at Pittsburgh. Both teams that Clemson's better than, but will be tough. Then you have Miami, who clearly has the easiest of the schedules. Florida A&M, Ball State, South Florida shouldn't be problems. Virginia Tech, like I said, Virginia Tech is not on the same level as a Miami, as a Clemson. They still have a lot of talent, but Miami gets them in Miami. Then they go at California. That game might be tough just because of the travel at Louisville. Then they host Florida State, host Duke, Georgia Tech, Wake Forest, Syracuse. So Miami clearly has the easiest schedule of the three. They also clearly have the best quarterback of the three. Ward looked phenomenal. He almost looked like he wasn't even trying out there. And I get Florida is not a good team, but he looked great compared to Florida State and Clemson's quarterbacks who struggled so bad. Neither one of them were able to really push the ball, move the ball down the field. And yes, I understand Georgia's defense was tough, but I don't think either quarterback really has what it takes to propel their team forward. And they'll really need the defense to hold back the other team. They'll need the running game to be involved. Miami will win the ACC. I almost guarantee it. Those are my 5 key takeaways from week 1 of college football. 1. Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter, to no surprise, are legit, but I think they are actually the best QB wide receiver combo in the country. 2. Penn State is going to be a real threat to those top teams in the playoffs this year. They are going to be different than years past. 3. Clemson is going to continue to disappoint based on preseason rankings. And honestly, if Dabo doesn't adjust, he needs to leave, because Clemson will never be able to compete with these true, massive, big schools until they get transfers. 4, I think Jackson Dart is legit a threat to win the Heisman. I think he's going to be the favorite heading into the midseason, the late season, and I think they will dominate their schedule and make the playoffs. Dart, Heisman, book it in now. And 5, Miami is going to be the clear favorite in the ACC. I think they walk away with it. I think it's not even that close. So let me know what you think. Do you agree with my 5 takes? Do you disagree? Are there any other major points that you saw during week 1 that should have been talked about? So please comment down below if you liked the video. For me, like the video, subscribe, and I'll see you later this week for some NFL stuff and next week for some more college football stuff.